I picked the topic, 10 Things I Hate About Ruby, because it was evocative of that movie in the 90s, the one stolen from, the one that stole its plot from the Shakespeare play. Entertaining movie, not a bad movie. If you get a chance to see it, don't bother. And as for 10 things, it depends on what base system you're using. You may count as few as 3 or 4 things in my slides, or you may count as many as 25. Your mileage may vary. So anyway, the first thing that I hate about Ruby, and maybe you already know this, is the swearing variables that are inherited from Perl. And by swearing, I mean that they look like, the way comic strip characters use profanity. They're all punctuation marks, $/, $exclamation point, $, this, $ everything you can think of, including some Unicode characters, I'm pretty sure. First of all, those are just inherited from Perl, and we don't need them in Ruby. I think you'll agree. There's a fairly fat book called The Ruby Way, which makes very, very little use of those global variables. Like, you probably cannot find more than a half dozen instances in 850 pages, that they're used, as far as I recall. So they're unnecessary. The side effects, well, global variables have the purpose of side effects, right? I think we learned at some point in either our education or our careers that side effects are bad. And these to me are especially bad because they change the innate behavior of the core methods that we're used to. Like, for example, $/. Who can tell me what $/ is good for? What effect it has? It's like a line terminator or separator or something. Yeah, so things that expect a certain kind of terminator behave differently based on how you set that thing. And, there's no question that sort of thing can be useful. If you absolutely have to use it, then use the English equivalents. You have this library called Require English that gives you named aliases for all those globals. But what I would really like to see in Ruby is just, a culture where we don't use those globals. I don't think they're ever necessary. Now, the most common time that I use them is in regular expression matching. I'll use $1, $2, $3 to match the pieces of a regular expression that matched. Now, in 1.8, especially earlier versions of 1.8, that made a lot more sense. In 1.9, it doesn't make so much sense. You can give names to the individual pieces of a regular expression that you're matching. And I think you'll agree that named entities are better than just saying, first, second, third, fourth, item matched. So that's probably my #1 thing that I hate. I also don't know why this there. There are too many ways to turn code into objects. And there are subtle differences between many of these, sometimes not so subtle differences, but I, who am supposedly a Ruby expert, have trouble keeping track, of all the details of this. And, it may be that many of you out there are smarter than I am and can easily keep track, but, I tend to use the very simplest thing that will work, and I don't use any elaborate tricks. But, well, take proc and lambda, for example. Those have sort of changed. They've sort of flip-flopped back and forth. I'm not sure that one of them is even used anymore. Do we still use proc in 1.9? Does anybody know? Does anybody care?
It still works, but you don't see it as much.
Okay. It still works, but you don't see it as much, is what one person says. So that means that it's, maybe falling out of fashion or something. I heard at one point that we were going to start saying lambda instead of proc. At another point, at an earlier point in time, I heard that, well, we're going to have both, but they're going to have slightly different semantics. But I don't think that lasted very long. But anyway, as if it weren't enough to have all these things, we've also got the Stabby Lambda now, so named because it looks like the left-hand side of the expression is attacking the right-hand side. And most of these exist for good reasons, but it would be nice to see a little bit more unification of all these things. And while we're at it, there's no kind of code block in Ruby that is not a closure. And I don't know if anybody cares about that except me, but sometimes, like doing metaprogramming, I have been more or less forced to do an eval of a string instead of like a block, because I didn't want the context of the block carried along with it. I mean, there are times when it can result in, well, what one person called a memory leak. It's really, strictly speaking, not a memory leak because Ruby is just doing what you told it to. But the point is, a code block in Ruby always carries its context with it. Any variable that is visible within that block, is known in whatever context that block is used from then on. And you can't forget that context if you want to. There have been times I wanted to forget it. Okay? Next thing. Personally, I find that reflection is confusing. And let me see if I can get some more of this on the screen here. I don't know why that didn't wrap properly. Let's take the instance methods method for an example. It behaves this way. This is the description that I got off rubydoc.org. Returns an array containing the names of the public and protected instance methods in the receiver. For a module, how do I fix this thing? Oh. Install Linux, says Matt. There we are. Returns an array containing the names of the public and protected instance methods in the receiver. For a module, these are the public and protected methods. For a class, they are instance, not singleton methods. With no argument or with an argument that is false, the instance methods in mod are returned. Otherwise, the methods in the module and its superclasses are returned. You understood all of that the first time, right? that's to me kind of the way reflection is in Ruby. I have trouble remembering. Okay, is this thing called just methods, or is it instance methods, or should I call it on the instance? Should I call it on the class? If I want if I say private instance methods, I'm pretty sure I'll just get the private ones. But if I don't say private or public, what do I get? And and is protected included in that? It just it confuses me. Maybe you're smarter than I am. It confuses me. Another thing is that arity for the methods is not adequately supported. I think that there is some provision for knowing how many parameters a method takes if you use method.new. But otherwise, I don't think there's any provision for that. So you can know the names of all the methods in a class or on an object, but you can't know how many parameters each of them takes. I think that's a failing. Now, next thing, Rubygems. There's been some flip-flopping back and forth over the years, over how Rubygems actually work. There was a time when we were told to set an environment variable that said -Rubygems, so that in effect it was doing a -r of a library called Rubygems and that kind of thing. And there was a time when we were told, just put require Rubygems at the top and you'll be fine. And then there was a time when we were told, you don't have to put require Rubygems at the top anymore. Just run everything and it'll be fine. And I don't know if your experience is different from mine, but it seems that whenever I move from my computer to somebody else's, it just, there are subtle differences in behavior, and it may be just because, I'm making minor switches in Ruby versions. It may be, because people have things set up slightly differently, but, I'll find that, on one machine I have to require Rubygems, and on another machine I don't. So, do I or don't I? And are gems really integrated into Ruby, or are they not? Now, with RVM and with Bundler, we've seen some improvement in that kind of thing, but there's still some basic confusion in my mind. As I said, your mileage may vary. There are certain pieces of syntax in Ruby that I find ugly or strange, and they are often because I don't have a good way of understanding what they mean, like the class, append self notation. I always, when I was learning Ruby, I just learned what it did, and I understood what it did, and I was fine. But in the back of my mind, I always thought, what is the double less than for? What does this mean? Did anybody else ever have that feeling? Some of you, yeah. The rest of you are too smart to care. But no, it always bothered me because, the purpose of any notation is to clarify your thought. And, I don't like, bumping into things that don't clarify my thought, that instead confuse it. So I never understood the double less than notation. And even now I prefer, to say, define self dot method name, like that. Probably some subtle differences there, but not many. The so-called Stabby Lambda notation, there have been actual arguments on the Ruby mailing list over whether this was a good thing or not. Not the semantics, but just whether a hyphen followed by a greater than sign is a good or a bad thing. And I have to say, to some extent, I understand it, because it, for one thing, I don't know how to read it. I don't know what it's, if I were to read a program out loud, as I sometimes will read a piece of code to the guy across the office or whatever, I don't know how to pronounce that. And also, it just looks wrong to me. It reminds me of C. I have many bad memories of programming in C, and I can't count the thousands of times that my finger typed a hyphen followed by a greater than sign. And I don't want to relive those moments. The rescue notation, this is a very minor point. It always bothered me a tiny bit that we're using equal greater than there, which is not used anywhere else except in a hash notation. So every time I see that, for 1 nanosecond, I think I'm looking at a hash. And this is also the only time that we have source and destination reversed. We're always accustomed to saying, assign the right hand to the left hand. In this case, we're essentially assigning the left hand value to the right hand variable name. Kind of a reverse assignment. Only place in Ruby you'll see that. And the only place in Ruby you'll see the equal greater than outside of a hash. So once again, it just, there are a couple of neurons in my head that itch when I see that. Now, you probably have your own set of things that you find, confusing or counterintuitive or, ambiguous or whatever. So I'll open it up for questions, not only questions, but comments, if you have any. Not everybody at once now. Yes?
How do you feel about the ordered hashes?
I like ordered hashes. I was one of the few people who fought to have them introduced. And I think it was Nobu Nakata who made an implementation and proved they didn't have any real impact on efficiency, because you're just keeping a little counter along with each value, each key value pair. The reason I like them is that if you want an ordered hash, you've now got one. And if you don't want it, just pretend it doesn't have an order, and you'll be fine. Seriously, because even in old versions of Ruby, when you iterated over a hash, it came out in some kind of order. And the same hash would always come out in the same order. So it's not as if you had any genuine randomness, right? If you need genuine randomness, you can implement it, and if you want order, you've got it. But part of the reason I liked ordered hashes was that when you make a hash literal, curly brace, A goes to B, C goes to D, E goes to F, that kind of thing, visually and conceptually, it looks like it has an order. But if you iterated, you wouldn't get that order back out again. But now you will. And I actually had, a few practical applications for that. For example, I had a situation where I had a kind of a state machine and a bunch of key value pairs where I would index off of a piece of input and use that as the key, and the value was a proc. So I would, match, no, I guess I was doing like some operation, not just simple like square brackets, but like a regular expression match or something against each key. And if I got a match, I would fire off a proc. And I wanted to be able to specify those key value pairs in order, because I wanted to say, this regular expression has to precede this one in order. So for me personally, there are use cases for it. Yeah?
So if that's why order hashes are okay, and you don't need them, don't use them, what's wrong with global variables? If you don't like them, don't use them?
I don't like them and I don't use them.
So
So yeah, so we can all get along, yeah. But they do make the interpreter more complex, and they make it slower, and sometimes other people do use them. And I once in a while I will look at somebody else's code and think, oh, it's Perl. No, it's Ruby. And I personally advocate getting rid of them, but I'll live just as long if we don't. Yeah.
What do you think is the right balance between too much syntax and maybe too little syntax?
You mean like syntax sugar, or what exactly?
Well,
You mean punctuation?
I mean, some Ruby has a lot of different ways of expressing things that maybe are less verbose, or maybe, in my opinion, sometimes are kind of cute. Sometimes people object to things like Lisp or Scheme from having such minimal syntax that you have to spell everything out, verbosely. I'm just wondering if you think there's a balance somewhere that you would prefer to work out.
Gosh, I'm sure there is some kind of balance. He's asking, is there a balance between too much, syntax or, cuteness and too little? Whereas, for one extreme, Lisp is nothing but, billions of parentheses per page, and something like, Ada or whatever is nothing but semicolons and punctuation, and APL was a bunch of things that nobody could type on their keyboard. It's hard to say where the balance is, hard to articulate it. Basically, one rule I have is that I don't like too much punctuation. And that's why I'm a proponent of what some people call poetry mode in Ruby. Now I wouldn't carry it as far as some people do. Like when I define a method, I always use parentheses, but I don't always use parentheses when I call it. That kind of thing. As far as different ways of doing the same thing, it's better to have a language that's too expressive rather than not expressive enough. So some people complain that they don't like the fact that we have for each in Ruby. Doesn't bother me, or not for each, but for the for loop. For this and that, blah blah. Once in a while, I will use that. It's kind of rare, but if I've sketched out an algorithm that just happens to force me to think a little bit more mathematically, well, when I took discrete structures and that kind of thing, we always used for. So I like being able to have little syntax alternatives. I hope that answers your question somewhat. Okay? Anyone else? Yeah.
On your too many ways to objectify slide, you had you said blocks, and you had just sort of the two block syntaxes, and I was wondering if you object specifically to the existence of two block syntaxes, or to the way that people use the two, because I have pet peeves about how people use them sometimes, but I kind of find both of them useful.
Right. No, I don't.
Repeat that.
Huh?
Like I hate seeing method call right after.
Yeah. He was asking about curly braces and do end. You know, do I object to the fact that there are two block syntaxes? And no, I don't. You know, I think that's perfectly fine. And like you, I do disagree with the way they're used sometimes. I don't want to see them mixed when they're nested. You know, I don't want to look down a page diagonally and see end, right brace, end, right brace, end, right brace. You know, first of all, you're nesting too much, and second of all, you're just messing with my head. You know?
I'll remember that.
No, but no, I think it's great there are two syntaxes. You know, and I follow the convention that came from Dave Thomas. You know, where you put curly braces for single line blocks and do end for multi-line blocks. Anything else? Yeah.
You mentioned arity before. Another thing is that arity is totally broken if you have default values for arguments. It just gives you the wrong answer.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
And there's no way to explain.
I didn't notice that. It's very likely that few people, if any, are using the arity feature. So it doesn't surprise me that it's, you know, broken for some common cases. Okay. Yes.
The things I find really annoying is the difference between yields to a block and calls to a prompt, particularly with regards to error. In some cases where I've had to kind of simulate a method call by a block, that's been problematic since unspecified yield parameters are going to be nil. In 1.8 and 1.9, now they've added that syntax that has defaults to block arguments. Did you have any comments on that?
Oh gosh.
Get the question again.
He's talking about
No, so they can hear it.
everyone. Yeah. He's talking about calling a block versus yielding. No. Calling a proc versus yielding to a block. Did I say that correctly? They have different semantics in terms of assigning parameters. I can't remember how that works. Anytime I do something, you know, a little bit esoteric, I just look it up, and you know, and sometimes I even look in my own book because, you know, all I did was buffer the information, you know, long enough to write it down. It doesn't all fit in my head. The book weighs 6 pounds. My brain only weighs 3.5. So, no, what I would recommend seriously is 90% of the time, just do what's common and simple and makes sense, and only venture out into the more esoteric things when you have to. Now, what's esoteric is a matter of opinion, but if you, I don't know, just, you know, do the best you can with it. Do what makes sense.
Would you think that if it was a unification of lambdas and procs, as far as semantics and saying 2.0, that would resolve a lot of these difficulties?
He's asking about unification of lambdas and blocks, lambdas and procs.
And methods.
And methods. Oh my. I think in a way I would like to see a unification. In a way I'm not really sure it's possible because the differences are pretty much all there for reasons. You know, there are edge cases. You know, there are times you want it to work this way. There are times you want it to work that way. And, you know, they're not always compatible. Yeah.
I really wish that actual keyword arguments had showed up in Ruby 1.9. And I feel that some of the effort they put into doing things like allowing you to give default arguments for non-terminating argument parameters, those felt like misplaced effort. like the ability to declare a function that takes A, B, and C and gives just a default value to B. Doesn't seem like it really adds anything useful because methods defined like that are going to be incredibly confusing to use, but we still don't have real keyword arguments.
Yeah, I tend to agree. Keyword arguments, you know, I should have put that in my list. We still don't have true keyword arguments, and you know, I agree. It's not going to be one time in a million that I'll default the second of 3 arguments to a method. And if I ever do that, you know, I'll put a big fat comment next to it because I think it is intrinsically confusing. And as for the idea of using a hash as a substitute for keyword arguments, I think that is, you know, an ugly, dumb hack, and it should just go away. I mean, we could use a hash for all of our arguments, right? We could. Yeah? Someone over here? Nope. Yeah.
Mentioned we were showing all the, when you first get into Ruby, you see all the different symbols, like, you know, T equals, whatever, you know, if it's a word like delegate, you can usually go find that in source and figure out, you know, how the delegate, they're using the delegate pattern and everything. Do you have like now that you're saying, like, you know, it is to remember everything, keep everything in your head, besides looking at a book, what's a quick way, or if you saw, you know, T equals and you're like, oh, I forgot what that is, how are you going to look that up? Like search for an operator, or, you know, less than on for a self-class, you know, what does that mean actually?
He's asking how do you look stuff up?
As far as like operator symbols.
Especially operators, symbols, punctuation. Well, if it's a method, then it's covered in rubydoc.org. And James Britt, I think, maintains that site. It's very well done. It's got some glitches in it, but I've spent, you know, hundreds of hours there. As for looking up something, you know, that is punctuation, but it's not a method name, you just have to go to a book. You know, it's in the index. You know, they usually alphabetize before the letters and numerals. Okay. Yes.
The default YAML parser is sick, allowing some non-standard YAML syntax. It's kind of had the unfortunate side effect that a lot of YAML written for Ruby programs is actually not correct YAML, and no other parser can read it, which has caused the problem that the replacement for sick, I believe it's called psych, actually is pretty much ignored because everybody's used to their old YAML still working.
Huh. He's saying that there's an issue with the YAML parser and generator that we've used for a million years not working correctly. Right?
Yeah, there's I know for us, like we had some configuration for Ontario, and the abbreviation being ON. Well, that's also on for YAML, and it's only bit us in the ass being the Boolean, so that really sucks.
Okay. Yeah, well. Oh, while I'm thinking about it, yeah, there's something I didn't mention here. I'll bounce it off you while I'm thinking about it. There have been times that I wanted array and hash literals to call new. Do you understand what I mean? So that, for example, if you say x equals bracket 1, 2, 3 or whatever, and if you happen to override, you know, or alter array new, you know, it would get those things passed into it. Have you ever wanted to do that?
You have to use the block.
Hmm?
You have to use the block where you hash dot new block, take the hash, take
Yeah.
the key, and then assign it back.
Yeah, you can do array.new can take a block, but what I was wanting to do at one time was, well, I have this friend who, pretty much makes a habit of doing with indifferent access on hashes all the time. Do you know that Railsism? It says basically take this hash and respond either to the string so-and-so or the key or the symbol so-and-so. In other words, you don't care if it's a string or a symbol, just treat them the same. But you have to call dot with indifferent access every time. I was thinking, it would be kind of cool just to override hash new and stick that feature in there, or add something like that. But it's not possible because when you create a hash literal, the new method is not called. It's like the interpreter just circumvents that and gives you a hash. So, I don't know, maybe I'm the only person who wants to do that kind of thing. And I admit, huh?
There was a long thread in Ruby core about that not working with string.
Okay. I haven't read Ruby core in a long time. You're saying there's a thread on there?
Yeah, in particular about strings, not calling.
Okay. Strings, yeah. I didn't even think about strings. Yeah, they also don't call an initializer. Okay. Anyone else? Yeah.
This probably won't work. Have you thought about overriding hash brackets in this case where you're passing in the new lookup? It's an overriding div.
That's overriding hash bracket for that.
Yeah, this is
Yeah.
bracket operator and hash. And then
Yeah.
you pass into a string and it won't hear the symbol.
Except that there are other hash methods that would not work, because this is another topic of conversation that comes up from time to time. The other methods that you can call in hash, they don't call the bracket methods, themselves. So just overriding bracket, doesn't change anything. There's also, like, for example, values at, or it's not called values at anymore, is it? Something else? I don't know. Okay. Something like that was changed. But yeah, overriding brackets for that would mostly work. But knowing me, I would get deep into a program and I would call some other method that I hadn't munched up that way, and I would shoot myself in the foot. Be saying, how can this not be in the hash? 5 lines up, it said it was. Okay.
I guess do you have any opinions on like the interpreters coming out with like Rubygems and JRuby and MRI, and do you see that impacting any of what you're talking about up here?
I think that MRI is always going to be the reference for all the others, sort of the de facto standard. At least I hope it is.
Read this question.
Yeah, he's asking about other interpreters for Ruby, such as MRI, or Matz's Ruby interpreter, Rubygems, JRuby, or some others.
REE, right?
REE, yeah. I personally hope that MRI is the standard for all the others, because that is the one Matz is driving, and he's, the genius behind all of this. I don't, in the imaginable future, see Rubygems, for example, deviating significantly from MRI in syntax and semantics. Now, you might always find some very subtle edge cases or some behavioral issues where they will differ, like, you know, gee, this one is 10 times faster, or gee, you know, the threads don't hang in that version, or whatever. But no, I hope they proceed in parallel. I believe they will. And I've been told I'm out of time. Thank you.